Hey, everyone. Today, we're diving into another terrifying case.
Make sure to support my channel by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications.
In the quiet town of Maplewood, where everyone knew each other's names and secrets were hard to keep, Dr. Julia Morgan was a respected figure. A skilled physician with a thriving practice, she was known for her compassion, dedication, and the calm demeanor she brought into every patient's room. But beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect life, Julia was hiding a web of deceit that would eventually lead to a shocking murder, one that no one saw coming. This is the story of how a respected doctor's secret life of infidelity with her patients unraveled, leading to a tragic end that shook the entire community. Julia Morgan appeared to have it all: a successful medical practice, a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, and a loving husband, Tom Morgan, who had always been her biggest supporter. Tom, a high school history teacher, was proud of his wife's accomplishments and often bragged about her to his colleagues and friends. To everyone who knew them, Julia and Tom seemed to be the perfect couple: intelligent, kind, and deeply in love. Their relationship had begun during their college years, where Julia had been pursuing a degree in medicine and Tom had been studying education. They were the couple that everyone admired, with Tom's easygoing nature complementing Julia's driven and ambitious personality. After graduation, they moved to Maplewood, where Julia established her medical practice, and Tom began teaching at the local high school. Over the years, they built a life together that seemed unshakable, filled with mutual respect, love, and shared dreams. But as the years passed, Julia's life as a doctor became more demanding. The long hours, the stress of managing her practice, and the emotional toll of dealing with sick patients began to weigh on her. Tom noticed the change in his wife, but he chalked it up to the pressures of her career. He tried to support her as best he could, taking on more responsibilities at home and encouraging her to take time for herself. However, what Tom didn't know was that Julia's growing restlessness wasn't just due to the pressures of her job. Something far more sinister was brewing beneath the surface. Something that would eventually tear their lives apart. It began innocently enough. Julia had always been empathetic towards her patients, often going above and beyond to make them feel comfortable and cared for. But there was one patient who stood out: Mark, a successful businessman who had been coming to see Julia for regular checkups. Mark was charming, confident, and attentive, in a way that Julia found herself drawn to. At first, their interactions were strictly professional, but over time, a flirtatious rapport developed between them. Mark would make casual remarks about how beautiful Julia looked, or how lucky her husband must be to have her. Julia, flattered by the attention, found herself looking forward to Mark's appointments, more than she should have. One evening, after an exhausting day, Mark casually asked Julia, "Do you want to grab a drink with me to unwind?" It seemed like a harmless suggestion, but Julia knew it crossed a boundary. Still, she agreed, convincing herself, it's just a friendly outing. They went to a quiet bar on the outskirts of town, where they talked for hours, about life, work, and everything in between. As the night progressed, the conversation took a more personal turn. Mark opened up about the struggles in his marriage, and Julia found herself sharing her own feelings of dissatisfaction and loneliness. They both realized they were treading dangerous ground, but neither made an effort to step back. One drink turned into two, and before Julia knew it, they were sharing a passionate kiss in a dimly lit corner of the bar. It was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment, but it was also the beginning of something far more dangerous. What started as an impulsive mistake soon spiraled into a full-fledged affair. Secret meetings, late-night rendezvous, they became a part of Julia's routine. She reassured herself, it's just a fleeting distraction, a way to escape the pressures of life. But deep down, she knew. She was playing with fire. As her affair with Mark continued, Julia became addicted to the thrill of secrecy, the deception, the excitement of being with someone other than her husband. But Mark wasn't the only patient who caught her attention. Soon, she found herself entangled in similar relationships with others. There was David, a young lawyer, weighed down by the pressure of a high-profile case. He came to Julia for stress management. But their sessions quickly took a more personal turn. Vulnerable, in need of comfort, David became easy prey. And Julia? She was more than willing to provide the solace he sought. Then there was James, a grieving widower, drowning in loneliness after the death of his wife. Julia had always had a soft spot for James, and what began as professional support gradually evolved into something far more intimate. James relied on her not just as his doctor but as a confidant, a companion. Two more patients followed. Michael, a troubled artist. Richard, a former soldier, battling PTSD. Each one found comfort in Julia. Each one became entangled in her web of deceit. To Julia, these affairs were an escape, a way to fill the void in her life, a way to feel wanted, in a way her marriage no longer provided. But the deeper she sank into her double life, the more tangled and exhausting it became. Juggling lies, sneaking around, living in constant fear of exposure. It was only a matter of time before everything began to crumble. Meanwhile, Tom couldn't ignore the growing distance in his wife. Julia was often preoccupied, irritable, emotionally absent. She spent more time at the office, and even when she was home, she was glued to her phone, always texting, always lost in thought. Tom tried to talk to her, but Julia brushed off his concerns. "I'm just overwhelmed with work," she said. Still, Tom couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that something was wrong. So he started paying closer attention, watching the way she smiled at her phone, the way her mind seemed elsewhere, even when she was physically present. The thought of another man crossed his mind, but he forced himself to dismiss it. Then, one afternoon, Tom decided to surprise Julia by bringing her lunch at the office. Knowing she had been working long hours, he thought it would be a thoughtful gesture. But when he arrived at the clinic, he was told Julia was out to lunch with a patient. A wave of unease washed over him. He waited in her office, and when Julia finally walked in, she froze. Just for a split second. Then she composed herself. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice slightly tense. "I thought I'd surprise you with lunch," Tom replied, forcing a smile. "But I see you already had plans." Julia quickly masked her unease and forced a casual laugh.
"Oh, it was just last minute," she said. "A patient was having a rough day, and I figured it would be good to talk over lunch."
"But I'd love to have lunch with you too. Let's go." They sat down to eat. But Tom couldn't ignore how distant she seemed. She barely engaged in conversation. Her mind clearly elsewhere. He knew something was wrong, but he wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Then, one evening, an anonymous letter arrived in the mail. There was no return address. Just a single sheet of paper. A typed message. "Your wife is cheating on you with multiple patients." Tom's heart pounded as he read the words. He had feared this possibility for months. But seeing it in black and white, it sent a shockwave through him. Who had sent this? Was it true? And if so, how long had it been going on? Tom couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, he confronted Julia, hoping, desperately, that she would deny it, that she would put his fears to rest. But when he handed her the letter, Julia's reaction was not what he had expected. Her face paled. Her eyes widened in shock. She swallowed hard as she read the note. "Tom, I don't know who sent this, but it's not true," she stammered. But Tom saw it. The fear in her eyes. The way her hands trembled. The way her breathing quickened. And at that moment, he knew. He didn't need any more proof. The truth was written all over her face. He realized then that the letter had been telling the truth. His wife had been unfaithful, and the revelation devastated him. "How long, Julia?" Tom's voice wavered as he spoke. "How long have you been deceiving me?" Julia tried to deny it, but the weight of her guilt was overwhelming. She saw the pain in Tom's eyes, the betrayal etched across his face. Her defenses crumbled and tears streamed down her cheeks. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Tom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you. It just happened." Tom felt his world disintegrate. The woman he had cherished and trusted for years had been leading a double life, concealing her affairs with patience behind the illusion of a devoted wife. The agony was unbearable, and he didn't know how to respond. He was consumed by a storm of anger and sorrow, but more than anything, he felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The loss of the life he thought he had, the loss of the future he had envisioned with Julia. "Why, Julia?" His voice trembled. "Wasn't I enough for you?
Julia couldn't meet his eyes. She couldn't fully explain her actions, perhaps not even to herself. The thrill of secrecy, the escape from her own unhappiness, the desire to feel wanted. They had all driven her down a path she now deeply regretted. "I'm so sorry, Tom," she murmured, barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you. I've made so many mistakes, and I wish I could take it all back." But Tom couldn't bring himself to forgive her, not in that moment. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too raw. He stood up and left the room, leaving Julia alone with her guilt and remorse. In the days that followed, Tom's pain turned to fury. He couldn't stop thinking about the letter, the infidelity, the lies. His trust in Julia was completely shattered, and he felt like a fool for never noticing the signs. The love he had once felt for her was now poisoned by the sting of betrayal. Julia, too, was spiraling. She tried to reach out to Tom to mend the fracture between them, but he had shut her out entirely. The silence was unbearable, and she felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her own guilt. Her affairs had been a temporary escape, but now she was drowning in their consequences. The men she had been involved with began to distance themselves, sensing a shift in Julia. The excitement and allure that had once drawn them to her had faded, replaced by tension and unease. Her career started to crumble. Patients canceled their appointments, and rumors about her unprofessional conduct spread. The respect she had once held in the community was slipping away, and her world was falling apart. Tom's resentment festered, consuming him from within. He couldn't let go of the betrayal, couldn't find a way to move past the pain. The love he had once cherished had mutated into something dark, a poisonous blend of heartbreak and rage. One sleepless night, after weeks of torment, Tom reached his breaking point. He couldn't bear to stay in the same house as Julia any longer, but he also couldn't bring himself to leave. He felt trapped in a nightmare with no escape. In a desperate attempt to get answers, Tom stormed into their bedroom. Julia was sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in thought. "Why?
"Julia?" Tom's voice was thick with emotion.
Why did you do this to us?"
"To me? I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" Julia looked up, sorrow clouding her eyes.
"I'm sorry,
"Tom," she said softly. "I don't know what else to say. I made terrible choices, and I can't undo them." But her apology only ignited Tom's fury further. He couldn't accept that she had thrown away their life together for meaningless affairs. To him, she had destroyed everything they had built. In that moment, something inside Tom snapped. Blinded by rage, he grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight from Julia's desk, and hurled it at her. The paperweight struck Julia on the side of her head with a sickening thud. She collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around her. Tom froze. The fury that had consumed him just moments ago dissolved into cold, numbing fear. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he tried to stop the bleeding. But it was too late. The impact had been fatal. Julia was gone. Tom's hands were stained with her blood, and he knew there was no undoing what he had done. His life, already in ruins, was now completely destroyed. The authorities were called. He was arrested at the scene, still in shock, still covered in his wife's blood. He confessed, unable to comprehend how his life had spiraled out of control. The trial that followed became a media sensation. The once respected doctor's affairs and the shocking murder dominated headlines. The small town of Maplewood was shaken by the scandal. The community that once admired Tom and Julia now looked at them with pity and disgust. During the trial, Tom's defense argued that he had been driven to the edge by Julia's betrayal and the emotional torment he had endured. The prosecution, however, painted him as a man who had let jealousy and rage consume him, leading to a brutal and senseless act. In the end, Tom was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The once promising teacher, known for his kindness and dedication, was now a broken man, haunted by what he had done. In his prison cell, he spent his days tormented by memories, unable to escape the weight of his actions. As for Julia, her life ended in tragedy. She had once been a skilled doctor, a respected figure in the community, and a devoted wife, or so it had seemed. But the choices she made led her down a path of destruction, one that ultimately cost her everything. The tale of Tom and Julia Morgan serves as a warning, a stark reminder of the dangers of deceit, infidelity, and unchecked emotions. It shows how the secrets we keep can unravel lives, leaving devastation in their wake. For the people of Maplewood, the scandal left a lasting scar. The town was forced to confront the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives. And in the end, there were no victors in this story. Only shattered dreams, broken souls, and the haunting echoes of what might have been. Perhaps by telling their story, others can learn from their mistakes and find a way to avoid the same tragic fate. This was today's true story. Our aim is for people to learn from such incidents and strive to improve society. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.